Welcome back to another lens review. This time I'm going to look at the Canon 50mm F1.4. It's still for sale, although the price has, as you'd expect, gone up a bit over time. Specs are on screen for you, not too much different from most 50mm lenses. This has a minimum focus distance of around about 45 centimeters, so it doesn't get that close, and most 50mm lenses don't unless they're a macro lens. As far as the build quality goes, this is pretty good. I wouldn't call it premium, but it's definitely a step above the entry-level lenses, made in Japan with a metal mount, although the plastics don't feel as high grade as some of the more expensive lenses that Canon do. It's quite a compact lens, particularly in comparison to some of the modern lenses around. Switch on the side for autofocus and manual focus. You have a fairly good wide ribbed grip so that you can focus the lens, and the focus throw on this is quite long. It's over half a turn from the closest focus to infinity, and you can also focus manually at any time with the ultrasonic motor. It doesn't make any difference, you won't do any damage to it. Canon don't supply a hood with this, but you can either pick up their official one or get a third-party one. Focus speeds are quick and it's also quiet. I wouldn't exactly say it was silent. If you've got a microphone on there you might pick up a little bit, but it is a good performance as far as the focus. A very low profile. Consider some of the lenses that we have nowadays much larger than this one. It's quite a compact lens for its day. Doing some basic tests now is my standard wall test. You can see there's moderate distortion and a fair bit of vignetting. That does clear up as you start to stop the lens down. By the time you've reached about f2.8 on a full frame camera, the vignetting is really a non-issue for most practical shots that you're going to take, so you're not really going to see it after that f-stop. Did expect a bit less distortion on this. It's a bit higher than most 50mm lenses. As far as the center performance is not bad at all, wide open on this test, and it progressively gets better as you stop the lens down. There is a noticeable jump in performance in sharpness at f2, and then at f2.8 again you'll see the contrast also increases quite significantly from 2 stops down from wide open. Corners on full frame are a little bit soft, and so are the edges, but they start to improve once you stop the lens down, and you'll see quite a decent jump at f4 and then a big one at f5.6 and f8. You'll get sharp images across the frame, so you really want to be down to about f5, 6 or a bit lower to get the maximum sharpness across the frame. If you're shooting on a crop body, you're not going to see these soft corners, so you're not going to need to stop the lens down nearly as much as you would do on full frame. Another practical test with the lens wide open. I'm going to stop it down just to show you. You can see at f1.4 the details are a bit vague. I would call it usable myself, but you do see that improvement in performance as soon as you start to stop the lens down. About f2, sometimes at f1.8, you can see a jump in contrast and resolution, and then once you go down to f2.8 you'll see another big jump in the sharpness of the image. If you're not shooting in low light, you don't need that super thin depth of field. It's definitely worth stopping the lens down to around f2, 2.8 to get an improved resolution in the center if you need that. Here's another quick sample showing you the difference between f1.4 and f2. The reason I don't use focus test charts is because they're usually at a fixed distance, and that doesn't always give you a correct indication of how a lens is going to perform. In this case, when you're doing close focus distance on the Canon around 45 centimeters, it's pretty soft, the image at f1.4 aperture, and you really need to stop it down at least 1 or 2 stops to improve that. There's a big difference in terms of the contrast. It's just the way that some lenses perform. Up close, the Canon lens is on the soft side, there's no question about that. So I'm going to call this as usable at f1.4 if you're not focusing within minimum focus, say 2 or 3 feet, and then it seems to improve the performance once you move your distance further away from the subject. I did notice that the rendering can be a little bit harsh at times with this lens. Again, it's going to depend on your focus distance, but wide open you can even see some sort of triangular shapes in the out of focus areas in the background towards the edges, and it can be a little bit distracting. Here's another one just to show you there's a bit of edginess in the background blur, particularly when you've got the lens wide open. So I did some more test shots just to see what the story was with the background blur, and what I found is showing you stopping the lens down at the maximum aperture. It tends to have that outlying and edgy effect, and when you start to stop the lens down a bit from about say f2, it does make it a bit more pleasant. I'm not sure why that is. It could be because there's an aspherical element in there. I haven't really seen that triangular shape before in the background blur on lenses. That's quite uncommon, but you do sometimes get that outlining effect, which can be a little bit annoying to some people. Really depends on your own personal taste. You can see here with the outer focus highlights there is some outlining around there. I also notice in some areas of the image you can get sort of a double outline effect. Look at the wood down the side of the shed, the panels, and you can sort of see a double outline, which can be a little bit distracting to the eye. What I found is once you stop the lens down a little bit, it seems to improve that. And the outer focus highlight areas, they also get a bit smoother as well once you stop the lens down. Next up, high contrast seen with chromatic aberration. There is definitely some wide open. You can see purple fringing, and there's also green fringing in the background. Once you stop down past around f2, it seems to improve quite a bit, and lens flare can also be an issue depending on where the sun is in the shot. Here's another shot that I took wide open just to give you an example of if the lens is going to be usable for you, and I would say for me at normal distances that the lens is usable, but there is obviously a loss of contrast and fine detail. You might be able to pull that back as I have done here in post-processing. I'm just tweaking the image a bit, give a little bit more clarity and texture to it, and I think that comes out quite nicely. I show you the images side by side so you can see the original on the left and the adjusted one on the right. That might be a little bit too strong, so if I go in and pull those settings back a little bit just to make it look a bit more natural. For me, I think it is usable at f1.4, but it isn't what you would call crazy sharp by any means. There are certainly sharper lenses out there at maximum aperture. If you don't mind doing a bit of tweaking in post-processing, you might be fairly happy with the performance at f1.4. Also noticed with this shot the foreground was a little bit on the busy side. You've got that edginess to it with the outer focus areas. I'm just showing you these shots just to give you an idea of what you can expect. You can make a decision for yourself whether or not that is to your taste. As with most lenses, if you're close enough to the subject and you've a fast enough aperture, you'll easily be able to smash out the background and blur that quite smoothly, and that's one reason why I've provided more samples so you can get an idea in different conditions what sort of effect you can expect with this particular lens, and they're all different. Here's a practical example. I was inside, available light only, and I decided to stop the lens down to f2.5. I quite like a 50mm myself for people shots. Focus on this seemed to hit the eyelashes around the eye rather than the pupil, but it doesn't particularly matter for this shot. I could have stopped it down a bit more, but overall the image is decent. I'm quite happy with it. If you don't need that super shallow depth of field, or you're in a really low light situation, you can just stop the lens down a bit and get pretty good results off of this without too much trouble. For me, I think the Canon is a better purchase second-hand. There are a lot of these around and you can save quite a bit on the retail price. I wouldn't pay the full price myself. The lens has been around for a while and I would have liked slightly better performance with the lens wide open, but it is maybe acceptable if you're not too close with your focusing distance. Potential drawback could be that nervous outer focus area rendering. That can be a little bit edgy at times, but that's going to depend on your own personal taste. Don't forget to stick around. I'll be doing more lens reviews in the future, and thanks for watching the video.